Hello, I'm Dr. Brian Fraser, and in this video I'll be showing how to read data from a CSV file, a comma-separated value file, into an Android application. So to start with here, I've got some data that I'm going to want to process. I just made it up. You can imagine it's maybe some meteorological data for a location. I get the months down the left, and then I want the rainfall and the sun. Maybe hours of sunshine. And I'm going to want to read this into my Android app and then maybe process it. Maybe I want to put up a graph, do something interesting with it, have quiz data or who knows what. So I want to get this data into my Android app. Now, of course, at the moment I could simply copy and paste it maybe into my Java code and run with it from there. If I start to get a lot of data or the data changes a lot, it makes a lot of sense to have a CSV file. So I've got this open in LibreOffice, the calc, which is the spreadsheet. You can do the similar steps inside of Excel. So to begin with, I'll save the file here, and I've got it inside of a folder. It's in my C drive, and I'm calling it CSV demo. So here it is. I'm going to create myself a new project here in Android Studio. So say new application sounds good, just whatever versions you like. Empty project sounds good. Main application sounds great. It's going to build that for me. So now what I want to do is somehow get it in here. I'm going to put it in through the resources. So on the left-hand side here, there's a resource folder. And I've got a number of folders here already. I want to actually create a new one for a raw file. So something that Android doesn't really process for me, it just gives me access to. So I'm going to say a new directory. So I right-clicked on the res, said new directory, and then in here I can type in, oh pardon me, I don't want to do that. Let's go here, right-click again, and I'll say new resource directory. Try it that way. And then here I can tell it what I want it to be. Under the drop-down, let's just start with the drop-down and go to raw, and it automatically suggests the directory name of raw. So let's just run with that. Say OK. And so now I can put any file type I want in here, and Android won't bother trying to process it for me. Now in order to do that, I need to get something that it can read. So I need a CSV file. So I'm going to say here save as, and I can now tell it what type of file I want. So I'm going to use the drop down here, and I'm going to select text CSV. Let's try saving that. Use the CSV extension, sounds good. Text delimiter, I'm not actually going to put any text delimiter in here, and save contents as shown. Sounds good. I think that'll do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show it here in my text editor just to make sure that we understand what the file data looks like. So it comes in, and instead of having columns, I've got commas. Now I'm showing one kind of minor error here that can crop up later. Is my data already had commas in it. And so in the file over here, it's indistinguishable from, is this the first column, or did you mean all of this to be the first column? So instead what I'm going to do is I could do a find and replace. Here I'm just going to edit it, and I'm going to change the commas into something else. If I wanted to be smarter about it, I could do some sort of quoting. LibreOffice will gladly put in quotes, but then I'd have to actually process the quotes when I'm reading it back in from the CSV file. So this is just good enough. I'll resave this file. It'll reload in my editor, and now we can see that only the commas are in places we want them to be. And one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just give ourselves some data here where we have no data here, and I've got no data here. And we'll just make sure that that all comes up in the file correctly. We've got kind of two commas in a row to indicate no data, and down here we've got a comma at the end of the line with no data there. We'll just prove that our system can actually read it correctly. Okay, so let me get rid of that for a moment. I now need to get this CSV file into my program. So I'm going to right-click on it and say copy, way down off the screen, so that says copy. And then I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to right-click on here and say paste. You want your file name to be all lowercase with no spaces. Put in underscores in case of any other sort of funky characters, but all lowercase is what you need. Okay, so now I've got the data available. I now need to actually go through and read it into my program. Now at the moment I'm not actually going to do anything with it. I'll leave it up to you to come up with what you want to do with the data, but let's just sort of go through the process of building this up. So I'm going to create a new function here, something like read weather data. Sounds good. Create a method. And I'll probably, well, I want to read it into something. I want to get away from text as fast as possible. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll create a data type that stores kind of one sample or one row here. So let's call that one, what do we want to call that? Maybe a weather sample. So weather sample is good enough to start. Of course, weather sample doesn't exist, so I'm going to hit Alt-Enter. I'm going to create the class weather sample. I'm going to put it straight into my current one here. I could move it to a new package if I wanted to make sort of a model versus a view, but this is okay to start. Now the fastest way to do this is to just define what data I want. So I've got a string, and this is my month. So private string month, private, and then I have here what I have: rainfall and sun. So private, and I think they are they're both ints. I'll make one a double. Let's make this one a double. Rainfall and private int sunshine, sun hours. Now rather than me manually writing all these getters and setters, I'm going to hit Alt-Insert. I'm going to say build me some getters and setters. I'm going to select all three of those and say OK. And now I have all of the setters and getters I want. Going back to my main, so that now gives me the data structure that I want to build with. Let's build ourselves out here. I'll make it a field of my actual activity so I can access it anywhere. Private, let's make it a list of weather samples equals new array list of whatever it is. That's good enough. Alt-Enter to auto-import. And I got to give it a name. Let's call this one weather samples. No sense being creative. Again, Alt-Enter to import. Okay, so I'll get here. Now we know where we want the data to go. I've got the file that came in. This data file came in to Android Studio, and it's what I want to read from. Let's write the code to make it happen. So first I'll just copy and paste in. This is based on some code found on a Stack Overflow post. You can follow that link here to find out sort of the basic code that I started with. So let's walk it through. What do I need to do? Well, I need to get access to that the CSV file, and so I can call getResources. I'm inside of an activity, so I just call getResources. I'm going to say open a raw resource, and I give it an ID. So I don't have to give it a name. I just give it the ID r.raw and what did I call it here? I called it data. So data.csv was the name, so that's good. And it's going to hand me back an input stream. So I can say input stream is equals get that, and Alt-Enter to import it. Once I have the input stream, I need to work with this line by line is the best way for a CSV file. So to do that, I need a buffered reader. Buffered reader, I'm going to call this one reader, new buffered reader, and I need to pass in here. I need to build an input stream based on a character set. If I tell it the character set, then it knows how to process the text file. So I can say new, let's put that on a new line here, new input stream reader. I can give it the input stream, so I just say input stream that I want to work from. And then here are the things I can specify, and I'm going to go with this sort of second one, the character set. So char set dot for name, and I give it the string, and the string here is just UTF-8, UTF-8. And then down here we will close that. I need to Alt-Enter in order to, not that one, this one, Alt-Enter to import the class. So now my buffered reader that I've got here, I can actually call the code to get a single line of text at once. So I'm going to say I need to create a loop to read the lines at once. So string line here, and then let's start with this and we'll kind of work our way through this. So while the line, here I'm going to say equals reader dot read line, oops, and it gives me back that does not equal a null, keep looping. Now we can check out what's going wrong here. It says, well, this is going to possibly throw an IO exception, so I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, surround with try-catch. We're going to print the stack trace here, and if I get an error here, I'm having an error reading an internal file, so that's really terrible. So I'm going to say log dot, and you're going to use WTF, which stands for what a terrible failure, apparently. And I can put in something like, this is my activity, and then I'm going to put in some sort of, error reading data file on line. And I can also here pass in another argument, which is my exception. So I can actually pass it the exception here. Log has to be imported. And line, why is it not happy with line? Could be null. Might not have been initialized. Okay, we'll just set this to be, we know it will be, but that's good enough. Okay, so now I've got the data that I can pull it in one line at a time. The first thing I want to do is I want to split it up, split by commas. And then I'm going to kind of read the data. So to split it, I'm going to create an array of string. I'm going to call this one let's call it tokens, because we're tokenizing the string. Tokens equals, and I can now say line.split. And so this will split it based on some token I give it, or some delimiter. And the delimiter I'm going to use is simply a comma. Oops. Needs to be a double quote. And so now this will split it on the comma. And it'll do things like if there's two commas in a row, it'll say, well, that's giving me back a token that's empty, which is what we want. Now, as I go through this, I need to actually process this somehow. So read the data in, and then we'll say well, that's good enough. So I'm going to put it into a weather sample that we have here. Sample equals new weather sample. Now, in one sense, this is kind of bad because my weather sample probably should accept as a constructor the different values that it takes rather than kind of building an empty weather sample, but this is kind of maybe a good start. I could go through and show how you extract them one at a time, but basically here I'm just going to say sample dot set month, and month is the first column in this, so this is going to be tokens sub 0, and it's already a string, so we're good. Sample dot set. Next one was rainfall. Now this needed to be a double. We already have strings, so I need to call double dot parse int, or parse double. And I'm going to pass in tokens sub 1. Sample dot set sun hours. And now this we said was going to be an int, so integer dot parse int. And I need to pass in tokens sub 2. So this should now kind of complete my weather sample. And then the final thing I want to do is add it to my list. So up here I've got this weather samples dot add, and I'm going to pass in weather sample. Oops, let's call it sample. And so we'll add it in here. Okay. Now the other thing that maybe we want to do is go through and print them out. So as we go through this, let's also add in here back into my weather sample. I'm going to alt insert. I'm going to add a toString method. Everything goes into my toString, and it automatically gives me my nice toString. So back over here, I'm going to put a log message out, log.debug. Again, this is my activity, and I'm going to put in something like just created, and I can now say weather sample, sample, and it'll give me some nice output in my log. Okay, let's give it a try. So I'm going to go run that. I've already got my emulator launched. Here's my emulator. Over here, I'm going to click on the Android monitor at the bottom. If it's not showing, you can click on this thing down here, Android monitor. I'm going to stretch that up. Now, if I look in the emulator, it's not actually going to show me anything other than like a hello world. Oh, well, actually more interesting than I thought. It crashed, which is fantastic. Now we get to see why. So let's maximize this window a little bit bigger. Anytime your application does something like this and says, end application is stopped, Well, let's figure that out. You have to come over here into the Android monitor, and on the log cat, it'll show you in here a big message as to what went wrong. It's got this huge text of the exception. So what do we have here? We had a runtime exception, unable to start activity. Okay, but what caused that, we might wonder? Well, it wasn't a bug in the Android code, very likely. It was very much more likely a bug in our code. If I look down here, it says caused by, and then it lists something. It says, so, okay, caused by a number format exception, meaning my parsing probably failed, and I can say my rainfall. Okay, so if I can click on the first link here, it'll take me to exactly that line of code. I could go through and debug this in a number of ways. I could set a breakpoint. I could try and catch any exception. I could print them out. A very simple way to do this is simply going to be for me to log this. So I'm going to say log.debug my activity, and then whatever it is my line is. So line is... So now when I look at the log cat, I should see a listing just above this exception as to what line I was processing. And verbose. Oh, here we go. So here's the line. And we can maybe immediately see our bug. It's actually processing the first line of the file, which is, let me pull that up, this here, the headers. So I need to get rid of the headers somehow. So I need to step over my headers. So inside of here, I could put in some other tests to make sure I step over one, but effectively I can simply say step over headers and put in a reader.readLine. So now step over those lines. Let me do a Shift F10. I'm going to rerun it. My application crashed. Crashed again, but this time it tells me, there was an empty string. So it crashed on, let's go to this line. It was unable to do this parse double. This time it was unable to parse it because it was an empty string. If I scroll back up in my outputs, we see that the last line it just read in was this one. And in fact, there's no rainfall. So my rainfall here was a 0. So here I need to say, okay, what do I want to do in this case? If I was just handling strings, it wouldn't be an issue. I can do something like if, well, this is tokens sub 1. If tokens sub 1 dot length is greater than 0, then parse it. Else, I can otherwise say, I'll just set the rainfall to 0. No data available. And I'm going to have to do the similar thing. Let me copy and paste, or Control D to duplicate this. I'm going to do the same thing here for my sun hours. So this is going to be tokens sub 2 and set sun to 0. So we'll just make sure that we don't process an empty string. Perhaps a better way would be me write a function, because I've got duplicate code here. Let's have a look at what's going on. So now we've got array index out of bounds exception. Length 2 index 2. It's unable to process one thing because it's processing, I suspect, let's have a look at what the last thing it processed was. The last thing was this line here. It ends in the comma, and it doesn't say there's any data after that. Because if we go back to my CSV, I had this one entry down here with no data at the end. So I could edit the data here if I wanted to. Oftentimes you'll be taking in a data file from somebody else, and you might need to update it quickly. So doing a lot of processing on the data file might not be so easy. Down here, I might say something like if tokens.length is greater than or equal to 2. Nope, 3. And tokens sub 2.length, if my string is longer than 0 and my data has actually got that token in it, then we'll run with it. I think actually here it's just not a function but a property. Yes. So now I'm handling the case where my data did not have enough columns in that particular row. Rerun the code. Now it actually finished processing. If I go back here to Android log, we'll see that it has gone through and it has generated them all. So let's just expand that. And for every one of these lines, we can see, like, let's take this last one. I call it last line here, 5135. And it says last line here, 51.0 and 35. And so it seems to be processing all of my data correctly. Now, the one final thing I'd like to say is, if your data file that you're processing to begin with is a bit of a mess, you're probably well advised to clean it up first into a format that is sort of, you think might be reasonable to process. You can do that fairly quickly with Excel. Maybe move columns around and so forth, and then that way you don't have to do huge amounts of crazy text processing inside of your application. Managing text is a real pain, and so this is a good way to go. So now in the rest of my application, what would I do? Well, I've got it all sitting here in my data file, in my array list of my list of weather objects. So I could put them into a text view. I could put them in a drop down, whatever it is that I wish to do to actually manage this data. Alright, thank you much for watching.